All right, it looks like we're at the top of the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for being here and for your interest in this topic. I'd like to welcome you to this Guava and TDS webinar on archive migrations. We're really excited that you could all be here and excited that you're interested in this topic. And of course, we're joined by Chris Clark with TDS, along with Mark Stevens and Chris Mueller. Chris Clark will be presenting the information today, and we're really glad that he could be here. One item of note before we get started, if you do have any questions, would ask that you put those through in the chat. There you see that chat window there, or the Q&A, and we'll address those at the end of the webinar. So yeah, if you have questions as we go through, please put those through. And we will get to those. And just another item of note, this is being recorded, so everyone who registered and is on this webinar will get a copy of this webinar recording for you to review later on. And we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Chris and let him go through the presentation. We're really excited for this. Chris.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Q. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Clark. I am the President and CEO of Trusted Data Solutions. I am stepping in today for Steve Flitter, who was originally going to do this presentation, so I beg your forgiveness and bear with me. I'll do the best I can. Joining me to prop me up today, I have two of my colleagues. One is Mark Stevens, who runs business development for us in Europe. He is also handles a lot of the interaction we have with our folks in the archiving world. And also, even more importantly, I have Chris Mueller, who is our Director of Delivery for the Archive Migration Practice Group for us. And Chris has a tremendous amount of experience, hundreds and hundreds of successful migrations for us and more importantly, our customers, and is hopefully can be a great resource on this call to share some insights and maybe some hard-won lessons. So I guess we'll just get started, and we'll go from there. So basically today we want to cover a little bit about who we are, talk about our experience in the archive migration world, and kind of conquer some myths that we hear out there, and what we do and how our offering is slightly different to what you see in this space. Primarily, we're going to talk about the two ways we deliver archive migration services for our customers and helping companies like Guava get data into Guava from legacy archives or other data sources, either through our managed services, which is our full service offering, and also our licensed software model. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today, and I guess we'll just start with a little bit about us, just so you know who TDS is. We are, TDS is primarily a technology services company. We're based in New York, but we operate in now 4 countries around the world. We are primarily specialized in helping organizations access legacy data estates, whether that's email archives, voice log trader systems, or anything, or ordinary customer data that comes from the backup world, information backed up to backup tapes, or archive to backup tapes and other types of media. So we've lived in that world predominantly since the mid-1980s. We were helping, in the early days, we were helping people get off of Wang to WordPerfect and other, one incompatible format to another. So we believe over the last 30 years we've seen a very consistent trend in that the next migration of my company's data to the next platform will be my last. So we've been going out of the data migration business now for 37 years. So one of the 3 pillars of our services is archive migration. We've been doing email. We've been working in the email archive space for about the past 15, 16 years, primarily helping people in the early days get into the big enterprise archives, putting their old legacy email from backup tape or legacy data into email archives, and now for the last 15 years helping them move to the next generation of archives. We have performed a little over 685 migrations over those years, ranging from the smallest, terabyte deals to enormous, hundreds of terabyte migrations, and sometimes billions, and I think 26 billion messages migrated for some of our larger commercial clients. We've pretty much seen it all. We specialize as a managed service organization, but just recently we have worked in we have made an acquisition last year where we bought a software company, Akaibu, and we actually do market the Evolve software tool for people who want to do migrations on their own. We can license you the technology to help you do it, or we can provide you a full managed service and anything in between, depending on your circumstances. So that's who TDS is. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of a foundation as to when we talk to you about our experience and what we see in terms of migrations and how that might be relevant to you. Hopefully this will pull together as we go. One of the things that we see in terms of archive migration, and I completely understand this from a business and even an IT perspective, it just sounds so simple. How do I move one set of data from an old system into into my new fancy Guava solution or whatever solution I'm trying to go to? It just sounds so easy. And one of the things that we can share with you, and I think that unfortunately, but we're on the telephone, I can't see any nodding heads. I can tell you that anybody who's done it or has tried to do it understands that they're not easy. There's no simple way. We kind of say internally here, the old 80-20 rule in any migration project. The 80-20 rule applies to migrations. 80% of the data is easy, and 20% of the data, or 20% of the job is potentially problematic and something you've never seen before. The only problem with migrations is the 80-20 rule applies to every single project. It isn't 80% of the projects go smoothly. It's 80% of the data in every project goes fine. It's always the 20% that's a little different, or there's always issues. So it's not easy. The other aspect, it's very easy to make mistakes. If you are in a situation where the data that you're migrating is important and is critical to your organization, whether that's through regulatory reasons or just the value of the data as an asset, and making sure that you actually are accurately moving data from effectively, and you have to provide an auditable, defensible process. It can be high risk because you're dealing with effectively, and usually there's a reason people are getting off their existing system. It could be performance related. It could be that the age, or it could be whatever those drivers are. Generally, we're not talking about the best kept or the best maintained or the most coherent data sets. So the ability to make sure you know exactly what you're moving and counting everything and measuring everything properly. Having that accuracy is extremely important, and accountability is important. So they can run into there can be risk associated with making sure you have a defensible process. And again, it's not easy, so it's very easy to make, to get in trouble and to, have inconsistencies or some type of accountability issues with your migrations. And I know that in IT, in the IT world, you just want to, buy the box or buy something that just makes it simple. I hate to tell you this, but that's just not the real world, or at least in our experience of our nearly 700 projects. It's just not the case. This does require, there's lots of different things that can go wrong versus, and that could be everything from the platforms that it's on to the way the data got in the first place. It's something that, it's something that is as my engineers like to say, a non-trivial exercise. And we could talk a little bit about some, some examples of that, and kind of the top 10 gotchas, as we go down in the call with Chris and Chris Mueller. But the other thing is, nothing can go wrong. This takes time. Volume is always a consideration when you're migrating, terabytes of anything. It takes time, and that is something that is again a non-trivial act. And to be able to do that, properly within proper accountability takes experience, but also a high degree of skepticism and diligence to make sure you're getting everything right and testing. So I hate to say, as we like to say, that There is no magic bullet. We would love it to be easier and faster, but it's just the nature of the beast. So we tend to default to just making sure we are extra careful, extra diligent, and over the course of so many migrations, have the right tools, technologies, but more importantly, people and processes to make those go smoothly. So if anybody's looking for the magic bullet, unfortunately, we don't have it, and if you find it, if you could let us know, that'd be great. I think after 15, 16 years doing this, we're pretty sure it doesn't exist yet. So, sorry to break your bubble, but that is something that is true in our space. And if that's the case, then it really is about how you approach this, and it's the combination of the tools, the people, and the processes, like I say. So from us, we've done the key things that we focus on is effectively the experience matters in our space, as we like to say, mileage matters. When you've done this enough times, you've pretty much seen most of the combinations of source formats, artifacts, issues, and we've seen a lot of we've seen a great deal of variable problems with customers. We perform migrations around the world for small and large customers, and ironically, the problems are not that different from whether you're a global bank or a smaller player. The scale of the problems may be different, but the actual root causes are pretty much the same. And I would say the thing that you ought to be looking at when you always have to be remembering that at the end, email migration's different from just other migration kind of processes, in the sense that the accountability and chain of custody is extremely important. So, and at the end of the day, the results of this matter. The ability, a successful migration or an unsuccessful migration is not an option. And I think that if about a third of the work we do is actually remedial work, where we've come in and fix or complete or restart a migration that was either attempted internally, or someone who did not approach this with the proper jaundiced eye or proper caution. So a bit of our business is cleanup, and it's just something that it's just the nature of the beast. So this is something where I want to bring kind of Chris in, but to show you, in our two ways we deliver our migrations to customers, we have our full service, fully managed solution, and these are the common sources that we deal with that are every day. And we always, about 20% of the work we do in a year is also customized. There are many times that we're actually dealing with either homegrown archives or certain unique bespoke implementations of certain archives that let's just say maybe are not industry standard or compliant, and we still have the bench and the ability to take those over. But if possible, I'd like Chris to kind of walk through, Chris Mueller, from a delivery perspective, to kind of walk through some of those formats and what we see, and just kind of cover them briefly, but effectively understand one thing about these archives. Many of these archives that you see out there are hand-me-downs in a lot of ways. What is the origin of a certain piece of technology? That company, that original archive company, may have been bought, sold 2 or 3 times, consolidated. So many times you're not dealing with the original archive manufacturer, which brings in and adds a little bit of variance and a little bit of the risk we talked about. I know many of the companies who are in the archive space now, Guava not included, of course, did not develop their own archives. So many of the source archives you're on are, as we call them, hand-me-downs. Think of anything that Autonomy bought. These archives are all previous owners, and that's one of the reasons why we see a degradation in functionality, but also just in terms of support. So, Chris, can you just give us a quick talk on the formats and what we see most of?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. So When it comes to the various archives, the predominant ones we see a lot of Enterprise Vault, a lot of EAS, Mimosa, and your point. But we see a lot of other ones too, like Commvault is one that we do as well. And the format that the data is in, is proprietary to each one, but yet it's not. It's how they store it is proprietary to what they store. But typically what we find is they store these in a format that we can easily work with, and it allows us to maintain the original message itself. So when we're actually extracting the data out of there, we don't have to, in most cases, do any type of like matching, because we can actually get it in what was the source format when it was ingested in. Then what we typically do is there's different ways that we can handle the data. If we have a direct line into the destination archive or the vendor it's going to, we can utilize that with the Evolve software. In a lot of cases, what we do is we typically go to say a PST or EML or maybe even an MSG format, and then that data is then taken and ingested into the destination archive. So the formats that we come across are pretty standard. Some of them are a little different, and Commvault is a good example of one where we actually have to go through a restoration process at the beginning to get that data. It's a process that there's really nobody else out there that does what we do, where we actually restore that data, and then we go ahead and we convert it into the format that the customer is looking for, that we need to present for the end format. So we've found a lot of different ways to do our work we do. Some of the stuff we do, like Enterprise Vault, we utilize the EV APIs for that. Other data, we actually just go right after the back-end data. Sometimes we do envelope rebuilding. Just so if you have journal archive data, one of the things that we want to make sure of is that all of the recipients are identified, so that when it goes to go to be ingested in the destination system, you don't just have the recipients that are in the headers of the message, but you also know who those undisclosed recipients were that were part of a distribution list, or they were part of they were BCC'd on a message. That information, where that's stored is different in each and every one of the platforms that we deal with, but we have experience with that, and what we're able to do is recreate that envelope and then attach the original message to it. So then when it gets ingested into the destination, not only do they ingest the original message, but they can also read that envelope information and index the recipients that aren't in the headers of those messages too. So there's a lot of different ways we can do things. We have experience with all the different platforms. Like I said, we can convert to not just one platform or one format. Like we can do PST, EML, MSG. We even work with notes data. Predominantly we work with a lot of exchange data, but we do a lot of work also on the note side. So we can convert NSF files to other formats if need be. Like if you're going from legacy data that's in notes, and we get the NSF files, we can convert those to any of the other formats that I had mentioned before. So from that perspective, those are the different platforms that we deal with. And really quickly, also I'd like to give you kind of an idea of how we do our work. As Chris said before, we purchased Akaibu at the beginning of the year, and the reason why we did that is because we actually utilized Akaibu's Evolve software for certain migration types that we couldn't handle ourselves, and we've had such great success with it. We wanted to bring that in as part of our arsenal for doing our migration. So that was one of the reasons we did that. But as Chris said, it provides us the ability to continue to use Evolve and have that relationship, but also it provides the opportunity for us to offer a different type of migration than we had in the past, which was predominantly in the past we just done a managed service where we did all the work, from start to finish, and then gave it to the vendor for the ingestion. Now, it's in order to we can offer the service where we don't actually do the managed service for you, and that helps save on the pricing. If you're price conscious, we have a couple different ways we can do it. We can provide you with the software that you do it, and sometimes this you might want to go through a partner to do that, or we do on occasion go through direct customers to do it as well. And along with that, besides just doing the software, we also have what's called a software and software assist, and that's basically where you can purchase hours that we can help with getting things set up in terms of the architecture, making sure everything is running as expected, and then going ahead and once that's all done, the customer takes over, the partner takes over and runs the migration. That way they get a good feel of how the tool works and what when you're configuring a job, what does it mean to create an archive and things like that. So we can also offer that now on top of the managed service. And just to give you an idea on the managed service side, what we do and have done since we started is the managed service side. We basically can work with your data one of two ways. One is if you have a live system or your data is in-house, we can do our work remotely where you just give us remote access into the environment. We'll let you know what servers we need so that we can run our tools. And then we do all the work, by remoting and doing that work. We have a team of engineers that works on a 24/7 basis. So if you're looking to try to get it done quickly, it's a good option because, like I said, but doing it 24/7, we always have eyes on the job. So, a lot of the jobs you run, we have scheduling within our applications, but just because you put something on schedule doesn't mean it doesn't need to be watched and maintained. And if you're only looking at it, 8-10 hours a day during the business day, if something happens in the evening that needs attention, you're not going to know it till the next morning if you're running it yourself. So on the managed service side, we're always watching that. We make sure that everything is moving, and we can generally do migrations about 3 times faster than the customer can themselves. So, if you're doing it yourself, you can save money because you're just doing the software and maybe some assist. But if you do the managed service, if you're looking, time is critical. It's a good option because we can get it done much quicker for you. So the other thing that we do too is we work with a lot of data that Chris alluded to this before. Is you have data that is old. You have some of these archives have been bought by multiple vendors throughout the years, and sometimes these come to customers via acquisition. They don't really know anything about it, and so what happens is they have this data, and email extender is a great example where they just have all this back-end data, all these EMX files. They have the old extender database, but they may not even use it anymore. It may just be there. So what we can do is we actually have facilities in New York that is a fully running operation in terms of being able to restore, extract, and convert data. So customers can send that data to us, and we can just process it in-house. And typically it's a faster process because we do have a very robust environment, and it's dedicated to doing exactly what it's doing. There's no other factors in between. Chris had talked before about what are some of the factors that can make a migration give you headaches with it, and working in a customer's environment, that can happen a lot because we're subject to the things that go on in the environment. So if there's not a lot of network bandwidth, where that will affect us. If the servers that we're working on are old, in terms of the source archive, that can affect us. If there are things installed on our migration servers that for monitoring purposes, or virus scanning, things like that aren't configured properly, they could affect the performance. So when it comes in-house, we generally are able to work around that because this is a dedicated environment that's isolated from everything else, and the only thing that happens there is the processing of the data. So it doesn't apply to all platforms. There's certain ones that if it's a live environment, we're certainly not going to have you copy anything and send it to us and do the work. But if it's older data or data that we can have you send to us easily, then we can do that kind of processing too. So that's kind of in a nutshell, what at a high level what our services are, both the managed service and the software option, as well as some of the platforms that we see. And one of the things I want to point out too is, if you see a platform on the slide here that doesn't apply to you, you have something else, we never say no right away. And the reason for that is we are willing to, see what the customer has and see if this is something that, have we looked at it before? If so, are we willing to pursue that? If we haven't looked at it before, if you can get us access to some of the data so that we can look at it, we're willing to take a look at it, and we'll give you an honest assessment of it, if it's something that we can easily deal with and put a solution around, or if it's something that, there's challenges there that we, see with the data you sent, or we've seen it before, we can explain what those challenges are. And that does happen, but in most cases, we like to be able to find out what the customers have, and again, if we don't have a solution for it, which is becoming less and less of a thing because we have added so many different connectors and modules to our tools for so many different platforms that now the chance of that is getting less and less, but we will always do it. So if there's something you guys are looking for and you haven't been able to find it yet, let us know what it is, and we can definitely talk to you about that and see what we can do for you. So
thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris, on that. This is the other Chris now. I'm referred to in our organization as the other Chris. So one of the things that I wanted to point out to you is, and this is a bit of a challenge for us, and when we talk to folks about our capabilities, is we started really on the bespoke side of technical migration and technical challenges. So, over the years, we would have some of our large enterprise customers that would come to us with unique problems and capabilities of these formats, or merging these formats, or remediating multiple archives into a new destination. So our capabilities kind of came out, were developed through that. We're not a software company. We were more of an engineering and design company and a development company to be able to solve bespoke technical challenges. So in a way, that gives us a little more, I think, a lot more breadth of being able to see and capability. About a third of the work we do is remedial. In other words, there's problematic archives, dysfunctional archives. One of the things that we would say that we see as some of the bigger problems to look out for is many times some of these first, second, and third generation archive platforms have real issues with the actual databases of where the database may say this is how many messages you have, but yet when we actually look at the storage of the emails, we may find 30, 40, 50% more data that's actually sitting there that the database is either forgotten about or somehow lost track of. So many times, especially when it's extremely highly critical from a compliance or even sometimes a legal hold perspective, to have, to make sure you're gathering all the messages, sometimes bypassing those databases and going right to the storage, right to the back end of it is the appropriate approach. So I would say that from a TDS perspective, we generally approach these projects very consultative and very collaborative with you. We love the straightforward jobs. Unfortunately, they're less than 40% of the projects we see, and maybe that's something that may or may not apply to this group on the phone, but it is something that I think anybody who has archiving requirements or sees a need for some type of movement of these platforms needs to understand that this is a reality, and if nothing else, hopefully we've kind of sensitized you to that. So. I was hoping, Q, that we can utilize the remaining time and make it a little bit more of a conversation. I would encourage, we've got people like Chris and Mark on the phone who've seen a lot of this. If there's any questions or anything that people would like to talk about, I would be happy to let these guys share their knowledge with you and hopefully give you a little bit of insight.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thanks, Chris and Chris. Great information. Yeah, let's take some time. If anyone has questions, as I stated earlier, please put those through in the chat in the Q&A. I don't see any at this moment. We'll give it just a moment to see if some of those come through.
as we're waiting for that, one of the common questions we get is costs and prices and things like that. So we're not I would just as we're waiting for some of those questions. Actually, I just saw an email I just got about it. There is no necessarily these are usually based on the range of the service, but we generally try to price this in a very simple, transparent way. Knowing the volume of data, it's usually pegged in some form or fashion to the volume of the data. We do not charge by hour per se on a migration. We try to give you complete a complete fixed price as much as possible. And obviously, depending on price sensitivity and budgets and things like that, we can go. We have the spectrum of service from the license and kind of DIY for some of the simpler work. We're licensing some software and some tools for you, all the way up through fire and forget. We'll take care of it soup to nuts. I can tell you that one of the things that I would kind of sensitize you to I mentioned this before, and from a compliance and legal perspective, a lot of the work we do in the other parts of our business is involving either litigation, government investigation, compliance, things like that, where we're helping our customers access data or gain access to legacy assets for some type of reason like that. So we are well versed in those types of requirements. We have provided expert testimony in those worlds. While we're not a necessarily new discovery company, we are fluent in that business line, but more from a technical perspective. So, sometimes we get involved in projects to help customers, understand where their data is, whether they bought a company or not, trying to get our hands on, be able to access that information and recapture or recover that information. So, we do get involved a lot of times with relatively sophisticated, problems with the customers that may derive from issues that they've had in managing their data, and in this case, email archives. So we're not afraid of that. We speak it pretty fluently, and we understand, kind of both sides of the technical side of that, but also the business and legal side, which is extremely important.
Yeah, hey Chris, real quick too, just to kind of add on to what you were saying before when you were talking about the pricing and that. One of the things I want to point out is what we do when we scope out a project. We don't just have the customer throw numbers at us and we throw numbers back. What we like to do is we like to get on a call after we have you complete a questionnaire, which is about a 3-page questionnaire. It just gives us basic information about your environment, how you determine size, things like that. And then it allows us to get on and have a quick conversation with you to be able to make sure that we understand your needs and that everything has been looked at properly, because different platforms have different ways of obtaining data. Sometimes you get it in a compressed manner. Sometimes it's by reports from the product itself. Sometimes it's by looking at storage. And we can help you understand what you really have, not just what you have in the compressed value, but what is going to be uncompressed. And when we present that for ingestion, how much data is actually going to be there as well. And we do that because we want to make sure that we can narrow it down as much as possible. So when we give you that time frame and we give you that price, it's based on what we truly believe is the scope of the project. That it's not you tell us it's 20 terabytes and we find out later on it's 40 terabytes. If it's 40 terabytes, we want to make sure we work that out with you up front before we give you any pricing information or even a statement of work, saying what we're going to do for you.
Wonderful. Yeah. It doesn't look like we had any questions that came through at this time, but yeah, great information that was presented, and thanks everyone for being here. Yeah, let's see. I'm just going to double check and make sure. We did have a number of people on the call. It doesn't look like we had any others come through at this moment.
Okay. Well, we certainly appreciate your time and attention, and obviously, you can contact TDS through our relationship with Guava, and we're really excited about what we're seeing and what we're building together. And if there's ever anything we can do, to give you, to help you understand this, happy to help in any way we can.
Thanks again, everyone, for being here, and thanks to everyone from TDS, Chris and Mark, for your for your information and for the information presented. And once again, everyone, this was recorded, so you'll be receiving an email shortly with the link to the recording. Thanks again, everyone, and hope to see you on the next webinar.